left because he helped his people, and that's why they hate him. There are a lot of dictators in Latin America, military dictators. I mean, a whole bunch of them. There was Stroessner and Videla. I mean, like in Argentina, for instance, there was a period of time during the 70s and early 80s where they were swapping out military dictators every other week. And yet the left obsesses about Augusto Pinochet, the dictator, the only military dictator that Chile has ever had. Now, his government was from 1973 to 1990. And during his period as president, I mean, to hear it from a leftist, he practically mass murdered half the country. That's the picture you would get from the leftist media about Augusto Pinochet. And they keep on harping on the guy. The other day, I saw Jordan Peterson talking to some Channel 4 interviewer, right? And, she was talking about Lenin and Mao, and then she mentioned Pinochet in the same breath. As if Pinochet, in terms of what he had done, the abuses of human rights that he had committed, which he did, was equivalent to what Mao and Lenin had done, which is absurd, right? Why is it that the left hates Pinochet so much? There were so many military dictators in Latin America during the 70s and the 80s, and yet they focus on this one guy. Why? Why Pinochet? Why not Stroessner? Stroessner killed basically 20 times more people than Pinochet in his 30-odd year regime. Stroessner was a thief, a murderer, a rapist. He was horrible by any metric. And yet the left never mentions Alfredo Stroessner. They only mention Pinochet. Why? I always tell you guys, you have to ask the why question, because why explains so much. Much more than how or the what or the where. Why? Why is something going on? The left hates Pinochet for a very, very simple reason. You see, during his 17-year dictatorship, and it was a dictatorship, during that period of time where he did commit human rights abuses, and there were approximately 3,000 people were murdered by the Pinochet dictatorship, 70% of those in the first 18 months. So it wasn't so bloodthirsty. It was more at like the lines that at the very beginning, a lot of people were killed who were probably going to wind up being guerrilla fighters in a possible civil war. But that's for another conversation. Pinochet did a lot of things that were bad. But the problem with Pinochet is that he did a lot of things that were good. The Pinochet dictatorship outright said that it was a right-wing dictatorship. It didn't fuck around. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. It says, we are a right-wing dictatorship. And they implemented right-wing policies. Free market ideas of free movement of capital and free movement of labor, lowering tariffs and trade barriers, privatizing the retirement system, creating individual retirement accounts, privatizing the healthcare system, and creating two parallel systems, one public for the poor and one private for everybody else, and a private system that is extraordinarily good, extraordinarily cheap. Look at OECD figures where Chile appears. It's among the most efficient healthcare systems of all the OECD countries and the cheapest for the consumer. Chile spends less on healthcare than practically any other OECD country. Compare that to the United States, which is the most expensive healthcare system of all the OECD countries. Pinochet did a whole bunch of things. For instance, Pinochet threw all of the Chilean oligarchy into jail in 1980-81. Yeah, there was a big financial crisis. A lot of banks did a lot of stupid shit, illegal shit. And Pinochet swept them all up, all of these oligarchs, all of these people who owned these banks, and tossed them into jail. And, nationalized the banks, wiped out the shareholders, i.e. these oligarchs, and reorganized the financial system. And, went through, solved the financial crisis of 1980-81, which is a huge deal in Chile. And all of those oligarchs, I remember watching TV, and they were in this prison called Capitulo. And they were there, and they couldn't get out, and their lawyers would go in and out, and the press would be waiting, to interview them. And all of these oligarchs, these big names, the equivalent of, like, say, I don't know, Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, Larry Page, all of these guys, Rockefellers, the equivalent of Rockefellers, and the equivalent of DuPonts, they were all in jail. because the Pinochet dictatorship determined that what they had done was illegal and tossed them into jail, right? It didn't put up with, corrupt oligarchs. And that's why in Chile, the oligarchs have always hated Pinochet. That's a dirty little secret. But anyway, there were a lot of mistakes that the Pinochet government did, the Pinochet dictatorship did. For instance, there were a lot of murders that were, unnecessary and politically stupid, okay? Not to mention, of course, immoral. There were a lot of measures that the government implemented that didn't work out in the end. But all in all, the Pinochet dictatorship improved the lives of the average Chilean citizen. And we can point to the statistics. By any metric, the Chilean people's lot improved between 1973 and 1990. By every single metric. Literacy, life expectancy, electrification, infant mortality, everything. Everything improved during those 17 years. In 1989, Pinochet decided that he was going to either step down or remain in power, but it would be a popular plebiscite. So he put forth the question, and it was, I don't know who formulated this question because it was idiotic, because the answer was obvious, though the results were surprising. And the question was, do you want 8 more years of Pinochet as your dictator, or do you want democracy as a concept? Think of the question. I mean, think how stupid it is, politically naive, because one of the problems with the Pinochet government, the dictatorship, was that they were politically naive and they never cared much about optics. They never quite understood how to manage optics, unlike the left. They put forward the question, do you want Pinochet to be your dictator for 8 more years with his current powers, or do you want open and free democratic elections? Unsurprisingly, Pinochet lost. He lost 44 to 56. Think about that. He lost 44 to 56. Now, everybody knows for a fact that that election was on the up and up, obviously, because no dictator is going to skew the results to lose by less. No, if he's gonna tamper with the election, he's gonna make sure that the tamper makes him win, right? I mean, not oh yeah, I only got 20%, but I don't want to look that bad, so I'll skew it up to 44. No, that doesn't happen. So nobody ever questioned the validity of the elections, and in point of fact, nobody ever has, because they were on the up and up. But the thing is, see, 44% of the population of Chile wanted him as their dictator for another 8 years. Why would they vote in such a way? Because they were happy. Because it was a good government. It was a very good government. Corruption went down during the military dictatorship. Social services, bureaucracies, and all the rest of all the government services that are supposed to be given to the people improved dramatically in some cases. The dictatorship did good by the people. And that's why the left hates him. That's why the left says all of these libels about him, saying that, he killed thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people, which is absolutely not true. That's why the left says that people who lived under the Pinochet dictatorship lived in fear all the time. I lived in the Pinochet dictatorship. I didn't live in fear. I was once picked up by a military patrol in Chile in 1984. I was 16 years old. I was picked up and I was held overnight in a military prison. Okay? I've been dining out on this story for years. And the fact of the matter is, it sounds really truculent. You sound like, holy shit, you were in a Pinochet jail. What happened? Did they torture you? Did they waterboard you? Did they beat you with a truncheon? What happened? And well, what happened was I was coming home from my girlfriend's and I'd missed the last bus. And there was a curfew at the time because of leftist terrorist attacks that were going on nightly. Armed terrorist attacks with bombings. That's why there was a curfew. Anyway, I missed my last bus. I was walking home from my girlfriend's, right? And, the military patrol swung by and they spotted me and they, all over the bullhorn, they said, stop where you are, please. And they came right up and said, what's your name? And they checked my ID and they put me in the back of the truck, right? Of the military patrol truck. And they took me to this prison. It was a neighborhood jail at the cops. And they stuck me in a jail with all the other miners. because since I was 16, I was considered a minor. They stuck me in with all the other kids who roughly the same thing had happened to them, and they called up my mom. And I could hear my mom yelling on the other side that she was going to kill me the next morning when she picked me up. Okay, and that was very humiliating. And anyway, the next morning, I got picked up by my mom, and I was like crying like a little bitch because I knew that my mom was going to be really pissed at me, and she was. And that was that. It was no big deal. It was no big deal. Okay, but of course, you tell the story one way, and it sounds like, oh my God, something horrible happened to the guy. You tell it another way with the full details, and you realize it was all bullshit. I talked about this here in an early post that I made. Anyway, my point in the story. You see, living in Chile was not a fearful experience. I was there. Few people lived in fear. And point of fact, because the military dictatorship had outlawed political parties, all political parties, left, right, and center, because there was no political party affiliation, it was not legal to belong to any political party of any stripe, because politics were essentially pushed off the table, people were sort of like relieved because they could just go about living their lives. And the Pinochet dictatorship created better lives for a majority of the Chilean people. That is why the left hates him. That is why they libel him. That is why they say things that are obviously demonstrably untrue. That is why they compare him to Mao and Lenin. They compare him to Mao and Lenin when he improved the lives of his people. He made Chile a better country for the Chilean people. So the point of all this that I'm trying to make, when a leftist starts saying that anybody, somebody, this guy, that guy, when they start saying that this guy or that guy or the other guy is some evil, evil, evil man, when a leftist says this, you know it's a lie. When a leftist says that somebody is the worst thing ever, the worst thing since Hitler, you know that they're trying to silence him. Because it's an old tactic from Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky said that it's not enough to defeat your opponent. You have to discredit your opponent by any means necessary. You have to discredit your opponent and say any lie about him, any libel necessary for him to be completely shoved off the stage. You have to disqualify him. That's what leftists do.